5 gallons of blood, a hitchhiker kept as a slave for 7 years, a scene so brutal the ratings board nearly shut down the whole movie. This is what Tarantino didn't want you to see in Pulp Fiction. After getting rejected by every major studio, he shot something so twisted that even today it's only talked about in whispers. The missing scene wasn't just cut, it was erased. Here's why nobody was ever supposed to know it existed. It all started in a small video store in Manhattan Beach, where 2 young movie fans, Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary, shared wild ideas about the kind of films they wanted to make. One of those ideas became something much bigger than either of them expected. Avary had written a script called Pandemonium Reigns, and inside it was a strange, unforgettable story about a gold watch, a pawn shop, and a man in a leather mask. That weird, intense part would later become a key section in Pulp Fiction. Tarantino and Avary's partnership wasn't like the usual Hollywood way of doing things. After Reservoir Dogs got attention, they met in Amsterdam and started piecing together scenes, sometimes literally taping sections of scripts together. But soon Avary left to direct his own movie, Killing Zoe. Tarantino kept going, rewriting and polishing the script for almost 2 years. He added most of the clever dialogue, but Avary's ideas were still a huge part of it. When the film finally came out, both of them won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. Avary's speech was so strange. He just thanked his wife and said he needed to pee. That night was the high point of their creative partnership. Oddly, they never worked together again after that. But the title Pulp Fiction itself has a much older story. Long before Tarantino used the name, it was a term from the 1890s. Back then, cheap magazines were printed on rough wood pulp paper so they could be sold for almost nothing. These pulps exploded in popularity. They were packed with action, crime, mystery, and science fiction. Readers couldn't get enough of them. One of the first was a magazine called Argosy, and soon it was selling over 500,000 copies a month. These stories introduced characters like Nick Carter, a detective who appeared in thousands of stories over the years. The pulps shaped how Americans thought about storytelling. They were raw, fast-paced, and full of larger-than-life characters. That spirit, gritty, shocking, and full of style, is exactly what Tarantino wanted to capture in his film. His title wasn't just catchy, it was a tribute to that wild, no-rules world. Still, getting Pulp Fiction made wasn't easy. In 1993, Tarantino and producer Lawrence Bender made a deal with Jersey Films. It came with some office space and just enough money to start showing the script to studios. At first, it looked promising. Columbia TriStar even listed it as a project in development. But things quickly went downhill. By the summer, the studio dropped the film. One executive called it the worst script they'd ever read. They hated that characters died and came back. They didn't get the humor. It was too violent, too weird, and made no sense to them. Some even thought the heroin scenes would ruin the whole thing. Others said it wasn't worth it without a big star. That rejection opened the door for Miramax. The studio had just been bought by Disney, and Harvey Weinstein read the script and loved it. He didn't care about the strange structure or the wild scenes. He saw something special. Miramax gave Tarantino full control and funded the $8.5 million budget. They even came in under budget by $500,000. One smart move helped make it all work. Instead of paying big-name actors huge fees, they paid everyone the same rate per week. Back in the early 90s, John Travolta's career was basically in the gutter. He was the has-been from Grease, known more for baby-talking with Kirstie Alley than anything else. So when Quentin Tarantino said he wanted him as Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction, the Hollywood suits lost it. Harvey Weinstein, fresh off his Miramax Disney deal, fought like hell to block it. He wanted Daniel Day-Lewis. He even offered Sean Penn. But Tarantino stood his ground. After a brutal back and forth, Travolta took a massive pay cut, from millions to just $140,000. But the gamble, it changed everything. One Oscar nomination later, Travolta was back on top, and Weinstein had to eat his words. While that was happening, Samuel L. Jackson was fighting his own war. He thought he had the role of Jules, until he heard someone else, Paul Calderon, almost stole it. So Jackson stormed into the audition, furious, greasy bag of Big Kahuna Burger in hand. One studio exec even called him Lawrence Fishburne by mistake. That didn't help. Jackson snapped, unleashed the full wrath of Jules Winfield right there in the room, and left everyone frozen. That performance, it wasn't acting. It was real. And the Jerry curl wig? Total accident. Someone bought the wrong one, but Jackson loved it. Said it gave him that NWA vibe. Tarantino agreed. Then there was Matt Dillon. Tarantino had written the role of Butch Coolidge for him. It was his to lose. And he did. Dillon hesitated, said he'd sleep on it, wanted to maybe play Vincent instead. That one pause cost him a career-defining role, because the next day Bruce Willis stepped in. He also wanted Vincent, but when he saw Butch was open, he took it. No questions, no ego, just instinct. And it worked, especially in that creepy pawnshop scene. Dillon later watched the film blow up from the sidelines, while Willis cashed in on one of his most iconic roles. And then came Uma Thurman. She wasn't even on the original shortlist. Michelle Pfeiffer, Meg Ryan, even Madonna were considered before her. When she read the script, she thought it was disgusting. But her agent saw the gold and pushed her to meet Tarantino. After a long lunch and a deep conversation in her New York apartment, she changed her mind. And that was it. She became Mia Wallace. That image of her with the cigarette on the bed? Iconic. It launched her straight into Hollywood's A-list. Originally, none of this was supposed to happen. Tarantino wrote the role of Vincent for Michael Madsen. He wanted to connect it to Reservoir Dogs. But Madsen bailed for a Western. Same with Lawrence Fishburne. Jules was meant for him, but he thought the script glamorized heroin. There were even talks of turning Vincent and Jules into two British guys, Tim Roth and Gary Oldman. Eddie Murphy and Charles S. Dutton were also floated. But when Jackson walked in, all those names disappeared. On a late May night in 1994, something strange happened at Cannes. A midnight screening, usually reserved for oddball entries or cult hopefuls, suddenly exploded into a full-blown event. The movie was Pulp Fiction, and it didn't sneak into the festival, it kicked the door down. Harvey and Bob Weinstein flew the entire cast to France like it was a blockbuster premiere, not some artsy indie flick. Cameras followed Travolta, Jackson, Thurman, and Willis everywhere. The hype was electric. People didn't know what to make of the film's out-of-order scenes, sharp dialogue, and brutal moments, but they couldn't look away. The jury was split. 4 wanted to give the top prize elsewhere. 4 pushed for Tarantino. It took Clint Eastwood, the jury president, to break the tie. Pulp Fiction won the Palme d'Or, and just like that, Quentin Tarantino became a name the whole world would remember. But that was just the beginning. Back in the States, the Weinsteins didn't slow down. They rolled out a publicity campaign like they were staging an invasion. Instead of letting the film speak for itself like most indie producers would, they did the opposite. They threw a luxury luncheon at the Eden Rock. They flooded posters with Uma Thurman's face. They held parties on yachts and called in favors from powerful critics. They even got TriStar, the studio that originally dumped the film because of the drug scenes, to give up the rights. The Weinsteins bet $8 million on a violent, dialogue-heavy movie with no clear genre, and they were all in. Then came the wildest part. Instead of trickling into small theaters, Pulp Fiction launched in over 1,300 cinemas across America. For an indie film, that was unheard of. Studios thought they were crazy. But by holding the movie back after Cannes and only showing it at a few key festivals, they built a tidal wave of curiosity. When it finally opened wide, people rushed to see it. In its first weekend, it earned $9.3 million, barely enough to edge out Stallone's The Specialist. But where Stallone's film flopped fast, Pulp Fiction kept going. Week after week, people kept talking about it, quoting it, going back to watch it again. The drop in its second weekend was tiny, especially compared to the action blockbusters it had outlasted. By the time the year ended, there was no question who had won the real fight. Pulp Fiction didn't just make money, it rewrote the rulebook. On an $8 million budget, it pulled in over $213 million worldwide. That kind of return stunned Hollywood. It proved that R-rated films filled with long conversations and strange characters could crush big-budget movies at the box office. Disney, which had bought Miramax, suddenly realized their quirky little studio might be more powerful than they thought. And the Oscars noticed too. 7 nominations, including Best Picture. It didn't win that one, Forrest Gump did, but to this day, that loss still sparks debate. For decades, the briefcase in Pulp Fiction has been one of the most talked-about mysteries in movie history. It's gold, it glows, and every time someone opens it, they look like they've just seen something divine. But what was really inside that case? Fans have come up with some wild theories. The most popular one says it held the soul of Marcellus Wallace. They point to the creepy 666 combination on the lock and that strange band-aid on the back of his neck. Some even say that's where his soul was taken from, like some old myth about the devil collecting souls through the back of the head. Sounds crazy, but when you rewatch the scene where the case opens and Vincent stares at it like he's hypnotized, it starts to make sense. Jules surviving a shootout and calling it divine intervention only fuels the idea that the case holds something far more powerful than money. But not everyone buys the soul theory. A more grounded group of fans believes the briefcase was full of diamonds, specifically the same diamonds from Reservoir Dogs. This theory took off in the mid-90s when people started noticing that both films could be connected. After all, Vincent Vega and Vic Vega from Reservoir Dogs are supposed to be brothers. Tarantino even considered making a movie about the two. And when the co-writer of Pulp Fiction admitted the case originally was going to hold diamonds, that only gave this theory more legs. Even if they dropped that idea during filming, fans held on to it, especially once Tarantino said most of his films exist in the same universe. That made the diamond theory more than just a stretch. It became part of the big picture. Then there's the weirdest theory of them all. Some say the briefcase was holding Elvis Presley's golden lame suit. Yeah, the one from his famous album cover. It sounds insane, but the idea exploded online years after the movie came out. Fans pointed to a throwaway line from Jules, where he says it's just his boss's dirty laundry. Maybe he wasn't joking. Plus, the glowing light makes sense if it's reflecting off that shiny gold suit. And since Tarantino's a huge Elvis fan and even had an Elvis character in True Romance, it's not that far-fetched. Some people even say that's why the characters act like they're looking at something legendary. It wasn't about value, it was about cultural power. But here's the twist. Tarantino never wanted you to know what was in the case. That was the whole point. He said it in interviews over and over. He wanted the audience to fill in the blanks and create their own meaning. He even used the same trick in Inglourious Bastard with Aldo Rain's unexplained neck scar. It's all part of his style. Let people argue and wonder forever. Most people remember that wild moment in Pulp Fiction when Vincent Vega suddenly shoots Marvin in the face, splattering blood across the car. But what they don't know is that what we saw in the final movie was actually the toned-down version. Tarantino had filmed something way more brutal. The original scene showed Marvin's entire head exploding, not with CGI, but with a full-on prosthetic bust of actor Phil Lamar. It was built just for this one moment, loaded with fake blood, brain matter, and explosive charges to make the head burst in the most realistic and shocking way possible. They used over 5 gallons of blood and spent nearly half a day shooting it inside a Chevy Nova at a Burbank studio. But in the end, that version never made it into the movie. It wasn't a creative change, it was a trick. Tarantino knew the MPAA ratings board would ask him to tone down something, so he gave them something to cut on purpose. He added this over-the-top violent scene knowing full well it wouldn't stay that way. When the ratings board demanded edits, he could sacrifice the exploding head and keep what he really wanted, the creepy basement sequence with the __. That scene was far more disturbing but not as obviously graphic. By removing the head explosion, Tarantino made it seem like he had compromised when in reality he got exactly what he wanted. Years later, Phil Lamar finally told the full story in an interview for Pulp Fiction's 30th anniversary. He said Tarantino told him straight up the exploding head was a setup. He said, "We're going to show this young black kid getting his brains blown out for the ratings people so you can leave in some other things." Lamar was just 27 when he played Marvin, and even though he was only on screen for a few minutes, that role never stopped following him. He made just $5,000 for 3 days of work, but that one part led to a whole new career in voice acting in shows like Futurama and Samurai Jack. In the original cut of Pulp Fiction, there was a scene that never made it to theaters, but it could have changed how we see Mia Wallace and Vincent Vega. Right before their famous night out to Jack Rabbit Slims, Mia surprises Vincent with a handheld camcorder. She's in her living room, playful but probing, asking him a series of strange rapid-fire questions. It wasn't just small talk, she was trying to figure him out. One of her most telling questions: "Are you a Beatles person or an Elvis person?" Vincent didn't even have to say it. Mia could tell he was all Elvis. That one detail might sound small, but it set the tone for everything that followed. She had the upper hand, playing the curious and unpredictable host, while Vincent tried to keep his cool. The way she questioned him, slowly turning a silly game into something way more personal, revealed how she liked to test people. And Vincent, calm as ever, played along even as she pushed deeper. Their chemistry didn't come from romance. It came from this strange power struggle wrapped in charm and mystery. It felt natural, but you could sense the tension building even before they left the house. Now here's the part most people miss. Later, when they walk into Jack Rabbit Slim's, Mia smiles and says, "An Elvis man should love this." In the final cut, that line sounds like a fun throwaway, but in the original scene, it made perfect sense. She already knew he was an Elvis guy. That restaurant, full of retro 1950s vibes, kitschy decor, and rock and roll energy, wasn't just random. It matched Vincent's style, his attitude. That single cut scene gave depth to the whole dinner sequence and showed how well Mia was reading him from the start. Quentin Tarantino loved that scene. He wrote it years before shooting even began. But when it came time to edit, he made a tough call. The pacing wasn't right. The interview felt too long, too familiar, like something you'd already seen in a dozen other movies by the early 90s. And Tarantino, never one to follow trends, didn't want his film to feel dated. Even though it was one of his favorite moments between Mia and Vincent, he cut it for the sake of rhythm. It's a move that shows just how much thought went into every second of Pulp Fiction. He wasn't afraid to lose a good scene if it meant keeping the bigger picture tight and unforgettable. In the original cut of Pulp Fiction, there was a moment that never made it to the big screen, but it almost did. Eric Stoltz, playing the drug dealer Lance, delivered a wild and furious monologue. In October 1993, Tarantino filmed a nearly 3-minute scene of Lance ranting about a gas station clerk who gave him fake directions. What started as mild annoyance turned into a full-blown meltdown, much of it improvised by actor Eric Stoltz. It was meant to mirror Vincent Vega's earlier rant, showing how hardened men could unravel over small annoyances. Though Tarantino loved the scene, he cut it to keep the film's pace tight, calling it a killer scene, killing my movie. He learned from Reservoir Dogs to kill his darlings, and often cuts brilliant moments that don't serve the bigger picture, like 90 minutes from Django Unchained. Another haunting scene in Pulp Fiction involves the masked figure known as the... Originally, Tarantino wrote a dark backstory. The was a hitchhiker brainwashed over 7 years by Zed and Maynard. Though parts were filmed, Tarantino cut them, believing ambiguity was more powerful. He confirmed the young dies after Butch knocks him out, not from the punch, but from the rope he's hanging by. His one chance at freedom becomes his end. A deleted cab scene with Butch and Esmeralda added emotional depth. Esmeralda reflects on death as a transition, not an end, and discusses violence as the most honest human act. Butch confesses he felt nothing after killing Floyd, revealing a family history of violence. The scene gave new layers to his later heroism. In 2021, Tarantino announced he'd sell unseen Pulp Fiction scenes as NFTs. Miramax sued, claiming he lacked rights, but Tarantino argued NFTs weren't around when his contract was signed. In 2022, he released NFTs with scanned script pages and his narration, not actual footage. Despite its modest $8 million budget, Pulp Fiction made over $200 million, transforming Miramax and proving indie films could shake up Hollywood. Bruce Willis's involvement was key. His star power helped fund the film through international deals before filming began. His move inspired other A-listers to take indie roles, blending art and commerce in a way that reshaped filmmaking.